So today we are in the last segment of this series on A Christmas Carol. And I know at least one of us at Crosswalk has enjoyed it. That's me. And that's all that matters, really. So that's good. But today I want to come back to something that Dickens remembered or has us remembering Ebenezer Scrooge saying. And it's after the last ghost visits. The last ghost is the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And I've referenced this a couple weeks now, but it's very interesting. If you remember Ebenezer Scrooge, this is the third and final ghost he has. First, he has this visit from his old business associate, Marley, which tells him you're going to have these ghosts come visit you and don't be totally freaked out. And then he has the first one, the ghost of Christmas past, which takes him into his personal past and shows him glimpses of his life from childhood into young adulthood. And then he has another ghost visit, and that was the ghost of Christmas present, where he's seeing what London is doing to celebrate Christmas, and a few key people in particular. And then he has this creepy ghost of Christmas yet to come that looks a lot like the Grim Reaper, in description. And he finds out toward the end, he's sort of getting closer and closer to a reality that he knows is probably coming, and that is that the ghost of Christmas yet to come is showing him within the next year, most likely, he's going to be dead. And he is terrified of this, and he knows that he's going to see this tombstone with his name on it. He is worried that he's actually going to die at this moment, and so he makes a commitment. He makes a pledge out loud to try to circumvent that reality. And he blurts out to the ghost of Christmas yet to come, I am a changed man. I promise to keep Christmas every day, and I will carry the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas yet to come with me every day. And then he falls into his own grave and wakes up to find himself in his own bedchamber and realizes he's not dead, but he's got a second chance, a time to turn it around, to change his stripes, to be fully transformed. And we find out, at least on that day, right away, that it appears that it actually happened. And I hope you enjoyed the clip that we showed last week, Patrick Stewart learning how to laugh. I got a real charge out of that guy who hasn't laughed for 40 years, and he kind of has to kickstart it because he's not familiar with this muscle, and starts to laugh and then can't stop being joyful all day. And we follow him and we see that he's a transformed guy. He's not this grumpy curmudgeon that's pinching every pence that he can find, but he's generous with his laughter, generous with his attitude, generous with his money, pledges a massive gift to some charitable organization, shows up to his nephew Fred's party and carries on, and the next day tells Bob Cratchit, you're going to have a raise and plenty of coal to keep you warm in my office, and I'm going to stand with you to make sure Tiny Tim gets the medical attention he deserves. So we look at that and we're like, wow, day one, looking good. This guy is a changed man. And my hunch is that many of you will have a similar resolve in 2 days. You have your ideas, and for at least a day, perhaps, you will be a radically transformed individual until January 3. And you're right back to where you started. And so knowing that this is ahead of us this week and knowing what this series was about us behind us, I wondered what might Ebenezer Scrooge have done to maintain his pledge, to be this changed person, to use a churchy word, to be born again and stay that way for the long haul. Because Dickens finishes his tale, and of course it's fiction, so we're just playing around here, right, with Ebenezer Scrooge, but he tells us that the change stuck, that he became like a second father to Tiny Tim, who became well because of Scrooge's generosity in his medical treatment. And that for the rest of his life, he just was known for being this transformed great guy, as good a man as the good old city had ever known. So apparently, Dickens is leaving us with this picture of a guy who was literally transformed and stayed that way. And I'm wondering, how did he do it? What did he do? And when we have the clue in Scrooge's pledge. It wasn't just, I'm going to keep Christmas every day, like he's going to keep the trees up and keep them lit. But it was something more than that. And I find it intriguing where he says, I'm going to keep the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future with me. I think there's something in that we need to sit with for today. Because I wonder what it means to keep the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future with us. And how might we work that out? And the idea that I had, if you can play with me a little bit, is I wonder, knowing that Scrooge was an accountant, basically, he was keeping track of numbers, debt owed, and repayments, and all that stuff. I'm guessing this is a meticulous note taker, and he keeps track of everything in his life. And I wonder if he's the kind of guy that would write down his experience that night where he had these ghostly visits so that he wouldn't forget. My hunch is that that's exactly what he may have done. And so I just want to take you on a little bit of journey to take a look in Ebenezer Scrooge's diary and see what he might have said after he had this experience of the ghost of Christmas past. I wonder if he would have said something like this. There were choices others made that affected me. My father, for so many years, left me to the care of my boarding school, even over the Christmas holiday. This is not what I wanted. I was hurt, alone, and felt abandoned. In my apprenticeship years, my boss, Fezziwig, made a different choice than my father. My old boss was generous and joyful at Christmas. What a time we had. During that time in my life, I even fell in love. I made the choice to make room for Belle. But over time, my fear of being poor won the battle over my other priorities, and I slowly and surely let my relationship with Belle, my love, die. I chose who I became. So I choose to be mindful of the forces that came together to form me, the choices others made that affected me deeply, both positively and negatively, and the choices I made that set me on my course. I choose to be mindful of the choices I make. And I wonder if there would have been great value in having such a reflection to go back to think about where he'd been and what formed him up to that point. Because my hunch is, maybe on that Christmas day, he was so focused on the holiday and living into this new reality that nothing really shook him and could shake him. And maybe that stuck for a week, but I bet somewhere down the pike there were some events that happened in his life that triggered him. Maybe somebody said something to him with the right tone, the right phrase that reminded him of his father, who, because of his own mourning and struggle, because Scrooge at his birth caused the death of his father's wife. I wonder if something would have been said weeks or months later that brought him right back to that experience of his own dad, where it would have caused him to close up a little bit and wonder, should he keep going forward? Or perhaps there was something that somebody that he cared about very deeply said that wounded him, and it caused him to pull back like he pulled back with this woman that he fell in love with. Or maybe the market would crash weeks or months after this day. And he'd look at his portfolio and it wasn't what it once was. And he's freaking out because his greatest fear is to be poor. And so at that moment, I wonder if that would serve as a trigger for him to pull everything back the way it was, the way he knew and had lived for so long. I think that would be a temptation, because that is a temptation for all of us. But I wonder if being able to go back and look and remember his experience, I think there's power in remembering. And perhaps if he remembered where he had come from, it would make it a lot easier for him to also remember who he wanted to become and choose to keep the course that he was on. That's a pretty good shot, I think, that that's true. Well, of course, he had another ghost that visited, the ghost of Christmas present. And I wonder if his journal entry might say something like this. And you know what I found it very interesting is Ebenezer Scrooge's journal entries here sound a lot like Pete Shaw's writing. I'm not sure. I didn't know that was possible. Here we are. So maybe this is what he said after the Ghost of Christmas Presents visit. While I walked around the streets of London, I saw that everyone was in a festive mood, enjoying each other and the season in every way. Good cheer all around. At Bob Cratchit's home, there was only love, even though the feast was meager. Even though I gave no reason for them to give me honor that night, Bob granted it anyway, claiming me the founder of their feast. Tiny Tim, who had every reason to be bitter, was instead full of love and faith. My nephew Fred and his friends were carrying on with great joy at the dinner I was invited to. Meanwhile, that very night, I was cold and alone in my room, bitter, angry, and suspicious of the world around me, guarding the wealth that was not serving me or anyone else. I was the one missing out on life and love and joy. That was the choice I was making. It was hurting me, and it was refusing blessing on those closest to me. In truth, I could have made Bob's Christmas so much the merrier, and I could have brought joy to Fred by accepting his invitation. I hurt myself, and I hurt them. I will choose to live in the moment, to choose joy and love, and to offer what I have for the joy of others. I think being able to go back and remember what was happening that night would be very important for him. Because usually the way we see things, as you remember, there's a phrase that we shared this past month or so. People don't see the way things they are. People see things the way they are. And for 40 years or more, the way that Ebenezer Scrooge had been seeing the world was with suspicion, with anger, that caused him to pull back, not engage other people, but have all kinds of reasons not to engage. And there had to be, because that was his MO for so long, there had to be moments when he would choose to go back to that default mechanism which he created, which would only keep him in his loneliness, which would keep him from engaging, which would keep him from blessing other people while receiving the blessing all at the same time. But if he could go back and remember what he was missing out on because he was choosing to stay in that default mode, maybe that would be exactly the kick out of his own nest, out of his own trap, that would get him to be more engaged with people. I think this is actually something that a lot of people need to do, especially if you're a person that tends to close in, tends to not be engaged with other people, and you feel disconnected. It could be that the lesson you learned from Ebenezer Scrooge is to be intentional about engaging in community so that you're not alone. More on that to come because church is a part of that, and I'll be getting to how that factors into all this. But there were going to come times in Scrooge's life where he wanted to pull back because that's what felt normal and familiar. And only something like this to help him remember would get him back on the right track. Well, the final ghost that came was the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And I wonder if after that experience, if he would have written something like this in his diary. What an awful visit this was. A clarion call to pay attention to what my apathy was causing and perpetuating. No more Tiny Tim, because Bob couldn't afford the medical care he needed. No more me, and no one mourning the loss of my life. I learned that the life I led was a dead end. I didn't take my wealth with me and didn't do anything with it. And the world was no better for it, all due to choices I made. I woke up determined not to make those same choices. I choose to stay awake today. I will use what I have to make a difference in the world with those I know and care about and with those I don't know. I will be generous with what I have for their sake and mine. Having something like this would have helped Ebenezer Scrooge stay the course, because there would be times when he would be tempted to go back to his stingy ways. Things that happened to him that happened to you and I. Perhaps he was generous for a while, and let's say he gave that whopper gift to that charitable organization, but then he hears this news story that the CEO of this charitable organization was getting a massive bonus, And he looks at that and says, I contributed to that massive bonus, and I don't know if I should contribute to that anymore. Or he finds out about a scandal that happened with some other charitable cause he was with. And anytime we hear that kind of stuff on that large scale, it makes us recoil a bit. Or even if it's on a personal level and there's somebody that we want to help out, and we help them out with some cash or some help, and then we find out that they make a decision that we don't quite agree with, or we think is reckless or stupid, or they drink it away or drug it away, or what if he helped Bob Cratchit? Let's say he gave him a bonus, that Christmas, and then he finds out that instead of getting the medical care for Tiny Tim, which he had hoped for, that he goes out and gets a new Xbox or something. And Bob Cratchit is having a great time playing video games while his family suffers. Well, if you're Scrooge, you'd be like, I don't know if I'm going to keep this up. But he'd have to go back to remember who he wanted to be to help him stay on the course. Otherwise, everything that he was and was so familiar would become him all over again. This idea of remembering, by the way, and reflecting is a key part of the Christmas story. In the Gospel of Luke, he gives us the birth narrative, and the scene is you have Mary and Joseph with the baby in this little cave space. The baby's in the manger, and all of a sudden, they're visited by these shepherds. And they tell the story about why they're there. They're watching their flocks and whatever, and then a big angelic chorus telling them to go look for this baby in swaddling clothes and all that stuff. And they make haste, they go to find out that it's exactly like what they heard. And so they see it, they hear it. There's got to be commotion around this if we just take the story and roll with it. And then everybody leaves. It's just Mary and Joseph and the baby again. And the thing that Luke gives us is says that Mary took all this in, and she thought about it often. In other words, Mary just didn't have this thing happen and then go on with Tuesday, the next day, or Wednesday, but that she considered this again and again. And we know that's true because there would be things that she would face and be challenged by as this little baby grew up into this man who would end up listening to the beat of a different drummer who would change the world and make us think very, very differently about everything. There would be some days when Mary would look and be so proud to see what Jesus was doing. Thousands of people would gather to hear him talk, watch him do his magic tricks and heal and that kind of a thing. And they'd be very, very excited about that. And Mary would be so proud. And then Jesus would blow it. Everybody's right there to follow him. And then he would say something stupid like, hey, anybody who really wants to do this God thing has to pick up their cross and follow me. And then all those thousands of people, save a few hundred, would just walk away. And so Mary's thinking, well, this was a very bad day. But then over time, seeing how Jesus reacted to all of it, she began to realize that she wasn't quite sure which days were good days and which days were bad days, because Jesus seemed to be measuring the quality of his days by a different measure altogether. And I wonder if she pondered the story from the very beginning. How did this whole thing start? Two very, very, very poor teenagers invited into this story. A story that was going to change the world. Poor shepherds who got the late night shift, choosing to be included in the story. All very, very interesting stuff. And she had to wonder what kind of reversal was happening here. There's great power in remembering. Remembering is actually a very big biblical concept. If you do a word search on remembering in the Bible, you will find hundreds of examples of this word being used. And there are two major uses of the word. If you go back to the Hebrew scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, you're going to find out that it kind of breaks in half. A lot of the time, actually just a little bit into the majority side of the time, the word for remembering is used to get God to remember. So the people are praying to God, remember who you are, God. Isn't that a crazy prayer? God who knows everything, hey, remember who you are up there, right? Well, there's a reason why they have prayers like this. Think about their mindset. As a people, they've just blown it. And everything they've heard about the gods and other cultural religious experiences are that these gods are not happy creatures. They're not happy beings. In fact, they're annoyed by humanity and would rather just squash them like bugs. But they've got this idea, this inclination that the God that they're experiencing is a good God who's gracious and compassionate. So when they blow it, they're asking God to remember that. You're different than all the other gods. We sure hope. Please remember that, God, because we know we blew it. We know we deserve whatever's coming to us. And we're asking for your mercy. Remember that you are a God of mercy and compassion. So more than half of the instances of remembering are the people of God calling out to God to remember who God is, which is a way of remembering themselves who God is as well. But then about the other half is about remembering who they are as people, human beings, and as a bunch of human beings together experiencing this thing called God, and you can't even put one name on it. I mean, we're so used to just using the name of God in just a handful of ways. We forget the hundreds of references to the experiences of God that people had over centuries of time, and all coming together with the same basic conclusion that this greater other that we have, this ground of being that we're a part of, is fundamentally good and loving and restorative and redemptive on our side for us all. And I wonder, as they remembered that, what that would do for them. Remember, by the way, that in contrast to a lot of the other cultural religions of that time, where believed that the gods who were running everything were angry with humanity most of the time, seeing us as kind of worthless, noisy bugs causing problems at their picnic. The story that we have from the Hebrew experience is very different. What comes out from them is that this God is gracious, that when this God creates everything, he looks at it as good, not bad. And when he looks at you, human beings, he doesn't see bad. He doesn't even see good. He sees very good. And what a difference that was in their culture to, at their core, identify themselves as good. It changes your orientation toward everything, and not just for yourself and your own self-worth, but then as you look at everybody else around you, you don't see labels. You don't see skin tones. You don't see economic status. You see fundamentally, in the eyes of others, very good. That is the core of everything. And that changes everything. That changes the way we enter life. This remembering who we are, where we've come from, is key if you want to experience life that it can be. And that actually is very much related. Think about the word remember. What is that word? Remember. Bring back together. You have these members of your story, members of what you are, and you are bringing them back. It's remembering. Does that make sense? You're bringing it back into wholeness. Ebenezer Scrooge, with the help of a diary, can remember who he wants to be by looking at his past, his present, and his future. Mary is able to remember who she is and where this thing's going based on her experiences of God and what she's seeing happening in the person of Jesus going forward. And you and I are called to do the same thing. And interestingly enough, the very idea of religion, which is not a real popular concept today, actually is deeply related to it. Remember that the word religion itself is tied to the root words for re-ligament, bringing back together that which got separated. When we choose to do religious activities like this, you are doing yourself a favor because you are re-ligamenting yourself to the core story. There are a lot of folks in our culture, and probably all of us here, love the phrase, well, I'm not really religious, I'm just spiritual. I really choose to be spiritual. That's awesome. That's a great venture. But what I want to encourage you to think about is that when you choose to do it just in isolation, you end up incapacitating yourself from actually experiencing the fullness of what the thing is, because this faith thing was never a me, myself, and I and God venture. It's never been about God and me. It's always been about God and we. So the very act of us coming together, just sitting in the same room, hearing music, singing together, talking together, greeting each other, this is all part of it. When we're not a part of it, we need to be re-ligamented, because you cannot experience its fullness in isolation or as an individual. Other things that we do here, which you're not going to do that often, except for in a setting like this. You're not going to sing songs together very often in the culture. Go to a Giants game, you're going to sing Don't Stop Believin' in the 8th inning or so, and maybe a few other things. You'll sing the national anthem together if you go to a ball game or something. But other than that, we don't really sing together, and yet something happens when we at least attempt to sing together here. When we choose to break bread together, when we do communion here, we are together re-ligamenting ourselves to that core story, remembering who we are and who God is in this whole mix. When we talk about things to give our resources to, our time, our energy, our passion, and our money, we are doing that together as an act of faith, saying we can do so much together when we're generous together. These are acts of re-ligamenting. These are acts of remembering. This new series coming up that I'll kick off next week, the name of it is simply Atomic. And I was inspired with the name of the series anyway, and actually the content, not so much by the book, but the name of a book that's called Atomic Habits. And it's about a guy who learned to engage in some behaviors that radically changed his life. I'll talk more about it next week, but this is a guy who everything about him and his experience up to this one particular point said, you're not going to make it. The dreams that you have are not going to come true because of what happened to you. And he chose to think otherwise. And he started to adopt tiny habits into his life. When we think about that word atomic, we think in two ways. Most of the time when we think about that, especially if you're thinking in terms of war, you think very big things. Like a massive amount of energy is exploded into a particular space. Or maybe you think in terms of nuclear energy and realize that is a reflection of this atomic energy idea and how from a very small thing, great energy can take place. But the paradox of this word atomic is that while big results can happen, they happen because of a very, very tiny thing that happens. Massive amounts of change happen from very, very small changes over here. And so next week, I'm going to introduce you to these tools about how to integrate this stuff and how it works together in our faith. We're going to do some things a little bit differently than we have in the past. On the outset, they're not going to look all that different, but it's a different methodology of introducing a different approach to this faith thing with some tiny atomic changes that I think can bring about some really atomic transformation. That's my hope anyway, and that's coming. And I think that was actually deeply a part of what Ebenezer Scrooge was about, and it was deeply a part of every follower of Jesus that we see in the scriptures and since. Brian, you said something just off the cuff here as you were asking people about the new year and all that, and it was something along the lines, repeat it, it was something like, if you do the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same results. Keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. I love that. Keep doing what you're doing and you'll keep getting what you're getting. Can you remember that? Say it out loud with me. Keep doing what you're doing and you'll keep getting what you're getting. Did I get that right? All right. Well, I think Scrooge learned through this great night that he needed to change what he was doing if he wanted to get something different. And I think that's all of us. Christmas isn't just December 25th. Christmas literally means the day of Christ, or the celebration day of Christ, Christ Mass, the celebration of Christ. And Christ was not born in a manger. Christ predated the birth of Jesus, which we'll see in 2 weeks. This idea of Christ is bigger than flesh and blood. It's eternal. And if we believe that God is present everywhere, then it means that this Christ thing that is happening is all around us all the time, in every person, everywhere. And if only we could get to a place where we actually recognize that all the time, what a difference that might make for us. That Christmas isn't just something we do, it's really something we are. And that's my hope for you. So this Tuesday, or actually better yet, today and tomorrow, here's your homework assignment. Take out a journal, piece of paper, write it down literally. That does something for your brain when you literally write something down. Probably more than when you type on the keys. That's a fact. You learn stuff more when you write than when you type. And so as you're writing this stuff down, reflect. Reflect on your year. What were the lessons you learned in 2018? What were the highs, what were the lows, and what was your takeaway? And what are your dreams for what may come? And if you want to do more than that and fill up an entire journal and go way back into all of your previous New Year's Eves and start talking about all those things that impacted you, that's fantastic. Do it, because it will help you become who you are capable of becoming, your very good reflection of God self. Let's pray together. So God, as we close out this service, this last service of 2018, we're grateful for a year in which great things happened in our lives. Even if they're clouded somewhat by the difficult things that have happened, we celebrate the good things that were present because you were present and you were very good. And that means there is good to be had and held and celebrated. And we're grateful for the incredible impact that you drove here through this church for literally thousands of lives that we got to touch because we said yes to your call. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that we actually got to see and touch, and thousands more that we helped across the globe. Thank you, God, for the opportunity to make a difference with who we are and what we have. May it be only more of the same in 2019. Help us become who you dream us of becoming. Help us become more and more our truest selves that reflect you more and more fully. And may we see our lives flourish, and may we see the world heal more because we did. In Jesus' name, amen.